So then, we are back with more understandings from the time of the Abrahamic son Ishmael, during the time where then the first covenant was established. The first and only covenant with the Creator was made, and the scripture used at the moment is the Quran. Very important scripture, giving us then a whole lot more understandings of the time of Abraham, and then what he had experienced with the Creator, and then his first son. There are many areas of the life of Abraham. It's very imperative for us to understand in order to have then the understanding of the Messiah, and then of his first brother, and then both lineages then coming as under the same family. So then we can understand the future, and then how it's going to be played out, as many areas then of the instructions are then being defined. And then obviously we are during the time of restoration. This means then the combination, and then these two brothers coming together. So then there are areas, for instance, of the Quran where we read then Abraham, and there are some slight distinctions in terms of names. The Arab, for instance, or the Arabic understanding of Abraham would be Ibrahim instead, but very much understandable. And there are a few other areas where it is important then for us. I have a very understanding of Allah as then the great and merciful God. There is a section of Sarah, for instance, where then we study where then the angels visited Ibrahim, and what went on during this time. So then there was an event related with a roasted calf, or then an animal from the flock, and there is also a section of it related with Sarah, that she was then glad because of the destruction of the city of the plain, because they were evil. There are areas where we must understand the context of what Allah is trying to show us via this very important viewpoint, because the first understanding is very much true, and then the spirit of the Creator came upon Ibrahim, and he did understand what the Creator was speaking with him while he was in a dream via a vision. So the angels then, obviously they did not touch the earth, because the earth was and is contaminated. So they show up to Ibrahim while he was then in a dream, and he saw a vision. As then we understand, then Abraham at this moment then is Ibrahim, as very hospitable he was. Obviously he wanted to prepare then a meal for them, and he wants to be hospitable. Very important. But we understand then the angelic beings, they do not require eating. So there are sections we can then clarify and then understand where they are coming from. We understand, for instance, the Creator is very straightforward when he speaks, as he then gave the understanding to Pharaoh then regarding Sarah. It was straightforward. He did not inflict Egypt with plagues. he simply had show up himself via a dream to Pharaoh, but not the Holy Creator. As we understand the Creator, he has many facets, and the facet that came upon Pharaoh when Ibrahim gave his wife was then Pharaoh was doing what was wrong. It was a sense of wrongdoing. It was not a sense of the holy presence of the Creator, because Pharaoh was pagan. So the natural understanding in the spirit is then the dread of doing what was wrong. However, then the Creator did not punish him because it wasn't his fault. Ibrahim had then given over his wife in exchange for conveniences. That's why when we are in a situation where other events are taking place, make sure you don't place the other's life on the line for your own conveniences, because the Creator is watching. In each person, time then comes. So as you treat others, so you are going to be treated. It may take some time, but the time comes. So then Ibrahim, then he was there, and the understanding of Allah came over him, and he had the understanding of heaven. And the angels, obviously, since they don't eat, we can simply understand then there was a desire of Ibrahim to prepare them a meal. So then in a vision he had during the night, he was having a dream, and then in a dream he had this vision. And then the angels, obviously, they did not eat. So then we must understand that there is a bit of a literary activity where we have then the task of filtering what is proper and what not, or doing a diligent study of it. Later then we understand Sarah did not have a scheme in order to get the holy plan in motion. She was not deceitful. The tent had no intrigue in it. Then later we understand also then the wife of Yitzhak. She had no scheme against Yitzhak or then against Esau. Simply the Creator spoke plainly. So there are areas where then the Creator, he does not waste any time. He does what he must, and he is very straightforward. He speaks what goes on, and understanding the natural character of the angelic beings, obviously they would not have Abraham or then Ibrahim preparing the meal knowing that he was doing as being hospitable, yet they would not eat. But then because of the culture of the time, as a person is studying, doing what the Messiah says, study the scripture diligently. Because if you don't study, you don't have the spiritual understanding. Nobody's going to take you by the hand. Someday you are going to have to give an understanding of heaven to somebody else, and you won't have what it takes to get the job done. That's why the Messiah said, study the scripture diligently. Each of us comes a time where we are going to have to give an understanding to somebody else. But then, because during the time where then Ibrahim was then preparing this calf, it was the culture of the time, always preparing a meal to those who were the strangers. But then we understand this event was not in a physical world, but in a spiritual world. So we can safely say then the angels simply mentioned, we understand you are hospitable. But in terms of preparing a meal and having them going through the chore of preparing a meal, then they would not eat. It does not make any sense. But Abraham or Ibrahim was then recognized as then hospitable, such as we acknowledge you are a hospitable person, however it's not required. So then the literary activity, for instance, from the lineage of Yitzhak, there are areas then, some portions of the scripture are then placed the meal on the top of this rock, and then a fire came out of the rock and consumed the meal. In some scripture you find then other types of answers. But in understanding from the viewpoint of the Creator, He's straightforward. What we can safely recognize in this vision was the angels, they did recognize Abraham was hospitable. However, if the angels would eat the meal as a regular person, how would they have a distinction of angelic beings versus having a dream with the regular people? You have to have an understanding where you define what is divine and what not. Many people, when they have dreams, they have faces of people that showed up, and some of them do eat while they are then having a dream. It would be very unfair for the angels to say, okay, go ahead, prepare the meal, then they would not eat. But in understanding the character of the Creator, we understand that He does recognize, yet He would say plainly it's not required. Then He would give you the understanding that these angelic beings, they don't have to eat, because they live in a spiritual realm. Eating and working and toil the land, those are for people of the flesh. So this takes away the mysticism of the situation. Another point is, Sarah, for instance, she was then favored because of the destruction of the cities of the plain. That's not the character of Allah. Be merciful. It's understandable, those people were very evil. But should we be then contented because of others' destruction? Or then would the Creator would reveal Himself? Otherwise, He's not merciful. So then Sarah, when we read the Quran, we understand she was then pleased when she had her son. That makes sense, because speaking of Yitzhak, Yitzhak then was the son of the pilgrimage. However, Ishmael was a son stationary, because Ishmael came from the relationship of Abraham and the Egyptian Hagar. Thus the Arab nations then were born. So then from this viewpoint, we are more acquainted and much more realized how important is understanding the proper chronology of these understandings. There are many factors, but so far the Quran is much more precise in terms of spiritual understandings than the Israelic lineage. The Israelic lineage is far beyond fableized, or then lots of fables and unrealistic understandings than the Quran. Quran is much more realistic. Though we can find some areas then requiring some refining, so we can be diligently searching and asking questions. Not say that it was not inspired, that's not the point. An example of these, let's say when Noah, he was then building the ark. There were then 7 pairs of the clean and only a pair of the unclean. What was the requirement of the 7 pairs of then the clean? It's because he was going to consume the animals while on a journey. Those animals he can eat. So then we are more and more acquainted with what goes on. That way we can remove then the mysticism away from the understanding, and understand the Creator as a person is speaking with us. So then, let's reevaluate what goes on. Then there they were in the spirit, and these angels, they came, and then Ibrahim went to prepare then a meal, but then the angels did not eat. Then the question is, should they receive a meal and then they did not eat, or were they recognized? We can safely say they were recognized as hospitable. But it's not recorded as, because the culture was so strongly devoted then to being hospitable. In action today, we in the western side of the world, we barely do it. We are not hospitable people when concerning strangers. But during the time of Abraham, or then Ibrahim, it was extremely important. So then we can understand then the angels simply recognizing his hospitality, but then defining the reason why they were there. Because when the Creator then he is involved, there is no reason for mistrust. But we do understand during the time of Ibrahim, those people would not eating, then the meal would become very mistrustable. Person would be not very polite. So because of this strong, nearly inseparable factor of the culture, when this understanding of the Spirit became reality in terms of recording, then the recorder would never admit any kind of visiting without preparing a meal. So then, were these words then recorded by Abraham or Ibrahim? No, they were not. They were told later. Because the first sections of the Holy Scripture, they were given via oral way, or then via verbatim. But then, many years after this fact, you find then yet the strong hospitality of the time. But then facts of the actual vision in a dream were not given with the proper understanding. But we do understand later the Scripture, the Creator always recognizes when a person does or does not do the work. So then, if these people would come and they would eat, they would be regarded as being anybody else in a dream. If they would prepare the meal and they would not eat, it would cause mistrust. It doesn't fit either. However, when the angels were showing up and recognizing Abraham, we know that you were hospitable. Meal at this point is not required. However, we are here to say this. So then later when they recorded, they would record as the event had taken place, making the reading much more inviting and much more realistic and precise. So then please stay tuned, much more coming up.